Mr. Siddharth Chatterjee, thank you so much for joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. I just wanted to get a sense of what the situation is on the ground. Yesterday, we were speaking to a journalist in South Africa, which is, according to the official numbers, at least the worst hit in the African continent. What's it like in Kenya, sir?
So far, first of all, thank you for having me on your show, Amitabh. I have to say that the government of Kenya actually has been very, very proactive in dealing with this particular COVID crisis. And the United Nations family here in Kenya is in lockstep with that vision. The president basically announced that Kenya was affected about 3 weeks ago. We are currently at about 142 confirmed cases. But as you know from epidemiological studies, that when you have one case, it's probably going to be 400 cases in 1 month, simply because of the velocity of the COVID-19 pandemic. Having said that, I think on many counts, the government of Kenya is doing a brilliant job. First of all, is making sure that there's a curfew in place at night so that people are not going into clubs or bars, and the physical and safe distancing is being kept in place. There are very important messages on hand hygiene and hand washing, which is coming out regularly. And I have to commend the Minister of Health here, Minister Mutahi Kagwe, who's really been at the forefront, truly as a commanding general, making this happen. And President Kenyatta, the head of state, has really wanted to make sure that no Kenyan is affected by the scourge of this particular virus. So on many counts, Kenya is doing an outstanding job. And what we as the UN family have done is we've looked at our UN development assistance framework to Kenya, which is actually from 2018 to 2022, and we've redeployed resources to support the government of Kenya. So we've actually redeployed about 45 million US dollars to support the government of Kenya's response. And this Thursday, we go into launching a flash appeal with all the donor countries, the government of Kenya, to look at a funding gap till the end of the year of about $110 million. So this is what we are doing here. And I have to once again say that the government of Kenya is actually showing an important pathway on trying to flatten the curve. Over to you, Amit.
Talking about pathways, now the UN Secretary General's message, which started off calling for a global ceasefire, end to violence. He's also now talking about lockdowns and how women are affected at home in terms of domestic violence.
The United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has been absolutely vocal and really very much marshalling the might of the United Nations community across the world to fight the scourge of the COVID virus. And 10 days ago, he issued an appeal for an immediate ceasefire in all corners of the globe to reinforce diplomatic action, help create conditions for the delivery of life-saving aid, and bring hope to places that are amongst the most vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I quote him, he says, "This is a call for a fundamental recognition. There should be only one fight in our world today, our shared battle against COVID-19. We know the pandemic is having a profound social, economic, and political consequences, including relating to international peace and security." Those are the clarion words of the UN Secretary General, and I hope the world will heed them. And yes, he's called for a lockdown to conflicts everywhere, because that's the only way we as humanitarian actors, the UN family, the intergovernmental organizations, the NGOs can actually gain access to the most vulnerable. And that's the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals of reaching the furthest behind first. That's what the Secretary General keeps reminding every UN resident coordinator in the world.
And
having said that,
it's interesting, the second part of his message, which is he's looking at figures where, say, in countries where domestic violence has doubled, and now the healthcare system, the NGOs, all people who deal with that are also having to deal with the COVID crisis. So he's bringing up another very important issue there.
It is a fundamental issue. In fact, we are privileged to have in the UN Secretary General a feminist. And I echo that words of his of calling him myself a feminist too. We have to keep up the battle to prevent the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence. Most of this violence is intimate partner violence. It happens in the household. And we have to change that paradigm, Amitabh. And that will happen when community leaders, when national leaders, when political leaders, where governmental, civil society leaders, we all come together with a united voice. But the most important role, Amitabh, are people like yourselves, the media, who can actually permeate every living room, every drawing room, every bedroom, whether it's through the internet or it's through radio or it's the social messaging, but we must stand up and uphold the rights, the dignity, and the inviolability of women's rights. We should not allow any woman to go through the disgrace of violence at home when there is this lockdown period. After all, they're the pillars of our societies, they are the pillars of our families. So we have to reinforce that message. Over to you.
When you were talking about Kenya itself and the government and the UN supporting it, being in lockstep with it, you were praising the efforts from the Kenyan government. There have been some blips, which you've seen even in India, in terms of trying to enforce the lockdown strictly and actually possibly violating human rights. Even the incident on March 20th in Mombasa, where President Kenyatta had to finally apologize.
You know, excesses happen, and excesses happen everywhere in the world. And that is why the international community, the United Nations family, will constantly be a voice of conscience, letting people know that it is very important to uphold the sanctity and the inviolability of human rights. As in India, excesses have happened in Kenya too, but I commend President Kenyatta for having quickly come out and apologized to the country for the excesses that have happened. Don't forget also, Amitabh, that perhaps as societies we need to hold a mirror up to ourselves to see why is it, after all, the policeman or policewoman does not come from Mars, is not recruited from some interplanetary galaxy. That person is very much a part of our society, our community. He or she has been the same child and same son that we've reared and brought up. Perhaps we need to start looking at ourselves, and maybe this period of a lockdown should also be a moment of reflection about how we treat each other, about equality, about not leaving anybody behind. And the most important part of that is how do we ensure the dignity of everybody.
In your own experience before joining the UN, you have been an ex-serviceman in the Army, a special forces person as well. Can the Army, or at least retired personnel, maybe not just the Army, but any disciplined force, be enlisted or enrolled even in voluntary capacity to help in a situation like this?
You know, militaries all over the world, these are outstanding women and men who have actually given their lives and service to the countries that they serve in. They are always driven by a spirit of service. I remember when I joined as a young cadet at the National Defense Academy in Kadakwasla, Pune, you know, the motto of the academy was service before self. And that's a motto that, you know, every serviceman, regardless of race, nationality, or caste or creed, carries within. And I really believe that the ex-serviceman can play a very important role, particularly in a crisis like this, of actually becoming the voices of sanity, the voices of hope, the voices of equality, the voices that promote the rights of women and children, the voices that actually ensure that people maintain safe and physical distancing amongst themselves at a time when we are clouded by this particularly egregious pandemic, making sure people observe proper hand hygiene and hand washing, and becoming models of that, ensuring that they become voices and enablers of the rules and regulations that the government has put in place. And essentially, they can play a very, very important role, and that is to protect women and children from being violated and abused. They must become those pillars of support, and they can do outstanding work. They can also be of great assistance to the law enforcement agencies. So I'm all for calling on the expertise. And keep in mind, amongst the ex-servicemen, there is a large volume of doctors and health workers and nurses who can be brought into service very, very quickly. And today we need additional help. As we've seen, there is no country which is immune to it. Amongst the most advanced countries in the world, their health systems have got ravaged. Today we are talking about 1.2 million people that are affected globally, and close to about 62,000 dead. We have a reservoir of human capital amongst ex-servicemen who can do outstanding work in supporting each of their governments in responding to this particular crisis. Over to you.
Sadly, overall, there has been a lot of critique about the UN itself. Now, in terms of UN reforms, how do you see that placed with the pandemic that the world is currently facing?
In fact, good question. I mean, this is one of the singular missions and the missions of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and his deputy, Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. They have called upon a UN which is fit for purpose. They have called upon a UN which delivers as one. They have called upon a UN that leaves no one behind. And let me tell you, this particular crisis is perhaps the place where there will be a true renaissance of multilateralism, a true renaissance of the UN coming together collectively. And as you can see in so many countries across the world, World Health Organization, UNICEF, FAO, UNDP, UNHCR, so many organizations have all combined together to make a response here. In Kenya, for example, I'm truly privileged to serve with the UN country team, which is so lockstep with the UN reforms, so much aligned to the vision of the UN Secretary General. And we've all rallied together in order to respond to this particular crisis. We don't see each other as particular agency and fighting for turf. We've all realized that this is an existentialist fight. And as the UN Secretary General often reminds member states, that we are all in this together and we will come out of this together. No one is immune to the virus, as we've seen. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, the First Ladies of Spain and Canada, nobody is immune. The important thing is, how do we actually serve our collective humanity together in order to fight off this particular virus? Over to you.
When you talk about existential fight, give us a little bit more sense of the healthcare system within Kenya itself and how capable it is to deal with what we would believe the next few weeks, days, maybe even a month or more, where the cases increase and they will have to deal with the spike.
Amitabh, the biggest fight is going to be the communications fight to flatten the curve. It's not the curative fight. I mean, we've seen that in Italy or Spain, the curative fight has taken a toll. It's taken a toll on society. It's taken a toll on health workers. It's taken a toll on national budgets. It is, close to 4 million people in the United States have actually are seeking unemployment benefits. We are serving in countries, be it in India or Kenya or parts of Africa, many parts of the world, which do not have that cushion. We do not have the health systems to be able to respond to such a grave pandemic at this scale. So therefore, the preventative battle is going to be very, very important. And that is the reason I commended the government of Kenya for having been very swift in locking down, in stopping international fights, in making sure that physical and safe distancing is being put in place, in making sure that there's a regular update from the Minister of Health to the population, in making sure that the president of the country is interacting with the people and letting them know that the country, the political leadership, the national leadership, everybody is with the people because there is no one immune to it. So it is going to be the preventative battle. The curative side is not going to be easy, Amitabh. And that worries me, I must admit. It worries the Prime Minister of India too. It worries you because our health systems are not equipped to cope with the velocity and the ferocity of this virus. So we have to do our best on the preventative side and make sure that we win the communications battle. But having said that, we also need to make sure that the curative side, we do whatever is possible. Today, we are seeing today, for example, the West or the US is no longer a market for, let's say, protective, gear or masks or gloves or ventilators or oxygen. And today we'll have to look for new markets. Perhaps this is a moment when we are looking at livelihoods being threatened by this particular virus. Do we realign our industry to now respond to this particular crisis, but also to future pandemics? And I feel that perhaps this may also see an opportunity for the healthcare business ecosystem to improve and generate new kinds of jobs over there. So this is one thing that we are exploring as the UN family, together with the World Bank, the European Union, the US mission here, and led by the government of Kenya, to look at, can we actually start retooling our industry to respond to this particular crisis by producing some of this equipment locally. And I think this will be a need. By 2050, Amitabh, don't forget, the world's population will touch 10 billion. And we have to be ready. This virus is teaching us many important lessons. It's teaching us a lesson on climate change. It is teaching us a lesson on good public health. It is teaching us a lesson on respiratory etiquette. It's teaching us a lesson on basics of hand washing. It is teaching us many important lessons. And I hope by the time we flatten the curve, we can look back and say, we as a society, we as a humanity have come out better, stronger, and more sensitive, and more caring, and above all, more compassionate towards each other.
Mr. Chatterjee, when you're talking about the lessons that have been learned after dealing with this war, around the world itself, and you're talking about future pandemics. And we've seen how man or humankind moving into the spaces of animals is probably one of the causes. We see what happened in Wuhan itself. Now, Africa, even Nairobi itself, we know of the habits, the eating habits, say bushmeat. What's being done on that front in terms of not letting zoomatic transfer from animals to humans?
Look, that's a reality, and that's not just a Kenyan problem, it's a global problem.
Sure.
It happens in
Sure.
some of the most advanced countries in the world where zoonotic diseases have happened. Now it happened in China, but zoonotic disease is not new. It has
Yeah.
been there, but now it is becoming even more prevalent simply because the ecosystems of animals have started to dwindle, and the population has exploded, and as a result more and more people are looking for food. It's not just food for satiating a particular mystic desire of longevity, but it's also about survival. So when people in parts of Africa are actually turning to wild animals simply because they are not being able to afford the local things. So that is why I'm talking about the equality that is so necessary, and that is why we have a sustainable development goal, which is number 1 and 2, which is about ending poverty and ending hunger. And this is the principle on which we have to base it on. So absolutely right. We have to continue the fight for preserving the climate and preserving, and winning the fight against climate change. Over to you.
Mr. Chatterjee, any message that you have through our medium, both wherever you're being watched, whether it's in India or abroad?
I would want to quote the poem by a Nobel laureate from India by the name of Rabindranath Tagore, where he talked about where the mind is without fear. And let me recite that poem for your audience. And he said, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic war, where the words come out from the depth of truth, where the tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into the everlasting thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. I would just add, let every country awake. Thank you.
Mr. Chatterjee, absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amitabh. Thank you for having me. God bless and stay safe.